The sunset painted San Francisco's financial district in shades of gold, its rays reflecting off glass skyscrapers as Agent Marcos de la Cruz reviewed surveillance footage in his unmarked FBI vehicle. The Filipino-American agent had spent 6 months tracking an international money laundering operation that threaded through the city's most prestigious banks. At 42, Marcos had earned his reputation as one of the Bureau's top financial crime specialists. Tonight's operation would culminate in the largest bust of his career, $3 billion in illegal transactions, 24 high-profile arrests, and connections to criminal organizations across 4 continents. Target is approaching the west entrance. His partner's voice crackled through the secure radio. Black suit, silver briefcase, moving to intercept in 5. Marcos checked his badge and weapon, standard procedure before any operation. 15 years with the Bureau had taught him the importance of protocols, especially in high-stakes situations like this. Officer James Mitchell sat in his patrol car 2 blocks away, drumming his fingers against the steering wheel. 3 weeks into his transfer from a small-town precinct, the big city had already gotten under his skin. Every call felt like a potential threat, every face like a possible suspect. "Something's not right about that car," Mitchell muttered to his partner, Officer Sarah Reynolds. "Tinted windows, guy just sitting there." Reynolds glanced at the unmarked vehicle. "Probably nothing. This is the financial district. People work. Late. Not taking chances," Mitchell decided, starting his patrol car. "Not in my city." The timing couldn't have been worse. As Marcos prepared to exit his vehicle and join the operation, flashing lights filled his rearview mirror. Mitchell's patrol car had pulled up directly behind him, blocking his exit. "Great," Marcos muttered, knowing the operation's timeline was critical. He reached for his FBI credentials as Officer Mitchell approached, flashlight beam cutting through. "The evening shadows. Hands where I can see them," Mitchell barked, his tone unnecessarily aggressive. "Both hands on the steering wheel." Marcos complied, keeping his movement slow and deliberate. "Officer, I'm a federal agent. My identification is—" "Did I ask you to speak?" Mitchell cut him off, shining the light directly in Marcos's eyes. "You've been casing this area for hours. Step out of the vehicle. Slowly. Officer, please listen." "Carefully." Marcos kept his voice calm. "I'm FBI agent Marcos de la Cruz. I'm conducting an ongoing operation, and you're about to—" "FBI?" Mitchell scoffed. "Sure you are. Everyone's FBI these days. Out of the car now." Through his earpiece, Marcos could hear the operation unfolding. "Target entering building. All units in position." Office workers leaving late had begun to notice the confrontation. Several pulled out their phones, recording the escalating situation. Last, "A warning," Mitchell's hand moved to his weapon. "Exit the vehicle, or I'll remove you myself." Marcos weighed his options. The operation was falling apart with each passing second, months of work crumbling because of one overzealous officer. "Officer Mitchell," Marcos read the nameplate, "you're interfering with a federal investigation. Contact your supervisor. Verify my credentials," and Mitchell yanked the door open, grabbing Marcos's arm. "Resisting an officer, that's another." "Charge." "I'm not resisting." Marcos maintained his composure. "I'm trying to prevent you from compromising a major federal operation." Reynolds approached cautiously, noting the growing crowd of onlookers. "James, maybe we should check his credentials first." "Check what?" Mitchell tightened his grip. "Some fake ID he bought online? Look at him. Does he look FBI to you?" The crowd's murmurs grew louder. More phones appeared, recording Mitchell's words and actions. "How exactly should FBI agents look, officer?" Marcos asked calmly, knowing the cameras were rolling. In his earpiece, chaos erupted. "Target made us. He's moving to the garage level. All units respond." Mitchell pulled Marcos from the car, roughly pushing him against the hood. "Hands behind your back. You have the right to remain silent." "Officer Mitchell!" A commanding voice cut through the tension. FBI Assistant Director Chen strode toward them, flanked by tactical team members. "Release him immediately!" Mitchell froze, his handcuffs halfway to Marcus's wrists. That man you're attempting to arrest is the lead agent on a 6-month federal investigation," Chen's voice carried to the crowd's phones. "An investigation you just compromised." The color drained from Mitchell's face as reality set in. Through the radio, they could hear the pursuit of their target through the building's garage. "Suspect heading east in a black SUV," crackled the radio. "Lost visual." Chen turned to Mitchell, his expression thunderous. "Congratulations." The San Francisco Police Department's Internal Affairs Office buzzed with activity as Chief Diana Rodriguez reviewed the viral footage. Every angle showed the same story: Officer Mitchell's prejudiced assumptions destroying months of careful FBI work. 8 million views in 3 hours, she muttered, scrolling through social media reactions. The hashtags kept multiplying. "Isya FBI Wild Filipino," "Isya Bad Cop No Badge," "Chija Prejudice with a Pension," or "Justice for Agent," De La Cruz FBI Assistant Director Chen paced the office, his phone constantly buzzing with updates about their escaped target. $3 billion in laundered money, connections to 12 criminal organizations, and now he's in the wind because one officer couldn't believe a Filipino man might be FBI. Mitchell sat outside, watching the news coverage on the waiting room television. Every channel showed his confrontation with Marcus, his words about what FBI agents should look like playing on repeat. Breaking news: a major FBI operation compromised after local officer racially profiles lead agent. Sources say the suspect had ties to international criminal organizations. Questions arise about SFPD's history of racial profiling. Officer Reynolds gave her statement to Internal Affairs. "I suggested we verify his credentials, but Officer Mitchell was convinced the ID would be fake. He said, and I quote, 'These people always have fake IDs.'" In the operations center, Marcus reviewed surveillance footage of their target's escape. 6 months of work, countless hours of surveillance, dozens of wiretaps, all wasted because of one officer's prejudice. Agent De La Cruz, a junior agent, approached with a tablet. "You're trending on every platform. People are sharing similar experiences with law enforcement." The tablet displayed a flood of posts. "Same thing happened to me at the courthouse. Judge didn't believe I was a surgeon. Security guard refused to believe I was the company CEO. Police questioned my pilot's license for an hour." Chief Rodriguez called an emergency press conference. Camera crews packed the room as she approached the podium. "What happened last night is unacceptable," she began, her voice firm. "Officer Mitchell's actions not only violated department policy, but also compromised a major federal investigation. Effective immediately, he is suspended pending a full investigation." Outside the conference room, protesters gathered. "End police prejudice. Credentials have no color. Trust federal agents. Stop profiling professionals." Mitchell's union representative reviewed the footage again, grimacing. "This isn't just a suspension case, James. The FBI is involved, the press is involved, and there's clear evidence of bias. You're looking at possible termination." "I was just being cautious," Mitchell protested weakly. "How was I supposed to know?" "By checking his credentials like he asked," the rep replied. "By following basic procedure instead of making assumptions. The FBI lost a major target because you couldn't believe a Filipino man might be a federal agent." In the FBI field office, Marcus prepared his incident report. His phone kept buzzing with messages from other agents sharing similar experiences. "Had local PD question my badge in Dallas last month. Took 3 calls to verify my credentials in Atlanta. Missed an arrest because security wouldn't let me enter the building." Assistant Director Chen reviewed the damage assessment. $3 billion money laundering operation compromised. Primary suspect escaped with critical evidence. 12 linked investigations potentially exposed. 6 months of surveillance wasted. Multiple undercover operations at risk international law enforcement cooperation, damaged, years of case building, destroyed in minutes. The evening news continued the coverage. FBI agent profiled by local police speaks out. SFPD faces scrutiny over bias training, international criminal escapes during botched arrest. Questions about law enforcement prejudice surface. Social media amplified each development. Law Enforcement Watch. How many cases have been compromised by prejudiced officers? Issue civil rights. Now, time for major police reform. Badge Watch. Credentials ignored because of race. Again, Chen called a meeting with the SFPD command staff. This isn't just about one officer or one incident. Your department's bias cost us years of work. We need systemic changes. Outside Mitchell's house, reporters camped out with cameras rolling, his phone filled with messages from fellow officers, some supportive, others condemning his actions. The key. Suspect we lost, Marcus told the review board, had connections to human trafficking, drug cartels and terrorist financing. Officer Mitchell's prejudice didn't just cost us an arrest, it put lives at risk. The FBI's command center hummed with activity as agents tracked their escaped suspect across surveillance networks. Multiple screens showed traffic camera footage, airport security feeds, and maritime port monitoring. Target last seen boarding. Private aircraft at Oakland International, Agent Sarah Chen reported, pulling up the footage. Tail number matches a shell company we've been monitoring. Flight plan filed for Mexico City. Marcus studied the screens, watching 6 months of work literally fly away. His phone buzzed with another update. The video of his encounter with Mitchell had reached 20 million views. Chief Rodriguez faced the press again, this time with FBI Assistant Director Chen beside her. Effective immediately, all SFPD officers will undergo enhanced federal credential recognition training. Body cameras will be mandatory for all interactions. A joint task force will review past complaints of credential verification bias. New protocols are being implemented for verifying federal agent identification. In the back of the room, Mitchell watched with his union representative. His face appeared on screen again, his words echoing through the speakers. Look at him. Does he look FBI to you? Social media continued to explode with similar stories. Security didn't believe I was the hospital chief of surgery. Spent 2 hours proving I was really a federal judge. Missed my flight because TSA wouldn't accept my military ID. Police questioned my congressional credentials. The SFPD training division scrambled to develop new procedures, mandatory federal credential verification protocols, bias recognition and prevention training, cultural sensitivity workshops, professional interaction guidelines, clear consequences. For violations, regular performance audits, community feedback sessions. Marcus received a call from Washington. The director of the FBI wanted a full briefing. This incident exposed more than local prejudice. It revealed gaps in interagency cooperation. We're implementing new protocols nationwide. Every law enforcement agency needs to recognize federal authority regardless of the agent's appearance. The afternoon brought more developments. 3 other major cities reported similar incidents. Congressional Oversight Committee demanded answers. Civil rights organizations called for nationwide reform. International law enforcement partners expressed concern. Multiple federal agencies reported credential verification issues. Police departments nationwide began reviewing procedures. Security firms requested updated training materials. Officer Reynolds gave her full statement to Internal Affairs. It wasn't just this incident. Mitchell had a pattern of questioning minorities in professional positions. He once detained a Korean-American district attorney for suspicious behavior in the courthouse. Last week, he refused to believe a black woman was really a bank executive. The FBI's damage assessment grew. Money laundering suspect traced to Mexico City-connected operations in 3 countries. Compromised evidence trails going cold. Witness cooperation, wavering international partners questioning security. Years of investigation potentially ruined multiple criminal organizations. Alerted Chief Rodriguez met with community leaders. This isn't just about one officer's prejudice, it's about systemic failures in recognizing authority across racial lines. We're not just changing procedures, we're changing culture. Every officer will be retrained, every interaction monitored. Bias will not be tolerated in any form. Mitchell's precinct captain reviewed his service record. Multiple complaints about credential verification, pattern of targeting minority professionals, several pending discrimination investigations, history of escalating routine interactions, documented bias in traffic stops, repeated violations of verification protocols, numerous civilian complaints. The evening news expanded their coverage. FBI operation compromised, the cost of prejudice. Police bias impacts national security. SFPD faces federal oversight after profiling incident. Criminal escapes during prejudiced police intervention. Law enforcement agencies nationwide review. Procedures, social media amplified each development. IDFED agents united. How many operations have been compromised? Law enforcement. Watch. Time for complete overhaul of police training. Civil rights. Now, prejudice threatens national security. Badge watch. When will law enforcement learn? The Senate Judiciary Committee called an emergency hearing on law enforcement bias. Marcus sat before the panel, cameras flashing as he recounted the incident that had compromised national security. Gentlemen, Senator Elizabeth Warren began. Walk us through how one officer's prejudice allowed a major criminal to escape. Marcus leaned into the microphone, his testimony broadcast live across every major network. 6 months of surveillance wasted in minutes. $3 billion in criminal proceeds untraceable. 12 linked investigations compromised. International law enforcement cooperation damaged. Lives potentially at risk due to one officer's assumptions. In San Francisco, Mitchell watched the hearing from his living room, surrounded by newspapers carrying his photo. FBI agent profiled, criminal network escapes. SFPD officers' bias compromises national security. Senate demands answers on police prejudice. $3 billion. Investigation ruined by bias. Chief Rodriguez testified next. Her words carefully measured. We've discovered a pattern of similar incidents. Officers systematically questioning minority professionals. Federal credentials ignored based on racial appearance. Multiple operations compromised over the past year. The committee displayed statistics on the screen. 127 reported cases of federal agent profiling, 89% involving minority agents, 45% resulting in compromised operations, $5.2 billion in lost criminal asset seizures, 34 escaped suspects in 12 months. 156 investigations impacted 23 international cases. Affected FBI Assistant Director Chen presented the broader impact. This isn't isolated to San Francisco. We're seeing similar incidents nationwide. Criminal organizations are exploiting these prejudices. National security is being compromised by bias. Meanwhile, at SFPD headquarters, the reform process began. Mandatory federal credential recognition, training, real-time body camera monitoring, new verification protocols implemented, bias incident reporting systems installed, community oversight committees formed, performance tracking software deployed, regular audit procedures established. Officer Reynolds led the first training session. Look at these credentials. Notice the security features. Every federal agent, regardless of race, carries the same ID. Verification takes 2 minutes. Prejudice costs billions. The social media storm intensified. A check the badge, not the race. A prejudice costs billions. Credentials have no color. Reform Police Now international news outlets picked up the story. BBC, US police bias threatens global security. Al Jazeera, American law enforcement prejudice exposed. Reuters, criminal networks exploit police racial bias. Mitchell's union representative delivered more bad news. The FBI wants to press charges. Civil rights violations, obstruction of justice. Your body camera footage sealed the case. They're making an example of you. Marcus received calls from agents nationwide. Same thing happened in Chicago last week. Boston PD questioned my credentials yesterday. Miami police detained me during a sting. Los Angeles sheriff wouldn't believe my badge. The Justice Department announced a nationwide audit of law enforcement bias incidents. Investigators descended on police departments across the country, reviewing body camera footage and complaint records. In San Francisco's federal building, Marcus met with the DOJ task force. Our suspect has connected with 3 criminal networks since escaping. Money laundering operations shifted to underground channels. Drug trafficking routes altered to exploit police bias. Human trafficking victims remain in danger. International crime syndicates adapting their strategies. The morning headlines painted a grim picture. Criminal networks exploit police prejudice. Bias creates security gaps nationwide. DOJ launches massive police audit. Senate considers emergency reform bill. Mitchell faced the police commission, his career crumbling. Your actions compromised national security. Federal investigations ruined across multiple states. Pattern of bias clearly documented. Termination proceedings will commence immediately. Chief Rodriguez implemented immediate changes. Real-time credential verification system direct. FBI communication channels, mandatory body camera reviews, bias incident tracking software, community oversight panels, professional diversity training, federal agency cooperation protocols. The FBI's damage assessment expanded. Criminal assets moved. Offshore evidence trails deliberately contaminated. Witness networks compromised. International operations exposed. Multiple suspects alerted, years of intelligence gathering, wasted partner agencies, withdrawing cooperation, social media, amplified new developments. A justice, depth, nationwide audit reveals systemic bias. FBI official, security compromised by prejudice, police reform, time for complete overhaul, civil rights, pattern of discrimination exposed. Officer Reynolds testified about department culture, minorities in authority regularly questioned, federal credentials routinely doubted, professional bias considered normal, complaints systematically ignored. International law enforcement expressed concern. Interpol, US, police bias affecting global operations. Europol, criminal networks exploiting prejudice. RCMP, cross-border investigations compromised. The Senate committee drafted emergency legislation, mandatory federal credential recognition, real-time bias, incident reporting, National Oversight Committee, standardized verification protocols, required cultural competency training, regular department audits. Clear consequences for violations. Marcus addressed the FBI Academy. One officer's prejudice destroyed. Years of work. Lives remain at risk due to bias. Security gaps created by discrimination. Professional credentials ignored based on race. National safety compromised by assumptions. The DOJ audit revealed disturbing patterns. 234 similar incidents. In 6 months, 92% targeting minority federal agents, 67% resulting in compromised operations, ATOLs. 4 billion in lost criminal asset seizures. 89 suspects escaped during interventions. 312 investigations impacted 45 international cases. Affected Chief Rodriguez faced the media. We're implementing complete departmental reform. Every officer will be retrained. Bias will not be tolerated. Professional credentials must be respected. Community trust must be rebuilt. Mitchell's termination hearing began. Officer showed clear pattern of prejudice. Multiple incidents documented. Federal operations compromised. Department liability increased. Public trust damaged. Professional standards violated. Position of authority abused. The Senate hearing room buzzed with tension as Mitchell took the stand. Cameras focused on his face as he faced questioning about his actions that night. "Officer Mitchell," Senator Harris began, "explain why you refused to verify Agent De La Cruz's credentials." Mitchell shifted uncomfortably. "I was following my instincts." "Your instincts?" Harris interrupted. "Or your prejudices?" The hearing screened body cam footage. "Mitchell, look at him. Does he look FBI to you?" Reynolds, "Maybe we should check his credentials." Mitchell, "These people always have fake IDs." The Justice Department presented their findings: pattern of discriminatory behavior. Multiple federal operations compromise systematic targeting of minority professionals, repeated violation of verification. Protocols documented bias in official interactions, numerous civil rights violations, history of ignored complaints. FBI. Assistant Director Chen testified about the damage. "The suspect we lost has reconnected with terrorist cells. Drug trafficking routes re-established through new channels. Human trafficking operations expanded during chaos. Money laundering networks exploiting security gaps. International criminal organizations emboldened." Chief Rodriguez outlined the reform timeline. Immediate department-wide credential training, new verification technology implementation, mandatory bias recognition programs, real-time body camera monitoring, community oversight integration, professional interaction protocols. Regular performance audits. Social media exploded with new revelations. Officer bias kills. Credentials over color. Police prejudice. Justice. For De La Cruz Marcus presented evidence of similar incidents. Asian American judge detained at courthouse. Black federal prosecutor questioned at crime scene. Latino military officer blocked from base access. Filipino American diplomat stopped at embassy. The DOJ task force expanded their investigation. Review of all credential verification incidents. Analysis of body camera archives, audit of complaint records, examination of training procedures, assessment of department cultures, evaluation of oversight systems, investigation of leadership, response. International news coverage intensified. U.S. police bias compromises global security. Criminal networks exploit law enforcement prejudice. American police reform under international scrutiny. Mitchell's final testimony drew harsh responses. "I was just being cautious. You can't be too careful these days. How was I supposed to know? I was following my training. These things happen sometimes." Senator Warren's response echoed through the chamber. "Officer Mitchell, prejudice isn't caution. Bias isn't professional judgment. Discrimination isn't public safety. Your assumptions helped criminals escape. Your prejudice endangered lives." The hearing concluded with dramatic revelations. 3 terrorist plots advanced during chaos. Drug cartels expanded operations. Human trafficking networks grew. Money laundering increased. Criminal assets disappeared. Evidence trails destroyed. Witnesses silenced. The Department of Justice unveiled its comprehensive investigation findings in a packed press conference. Attorney General Caroline Hayes stood at the podium, hundreds of cameras flashing. Our 3-month investigation revealed systemic bias in credential verification across U.S. law enforcement agencies. The statistics displayed behind her: 1,278 documented bias incidents, 94% targeting minority professionals, $12.3 billion in compromised operations, 234 suspects escaped during interventions. 567 federal investigations impacted 89 international cases, affected 45 terrorist suspects evaded. Capture Marcus testified about the expanding damage. The suspect we lost has established new trafficking routes. $3 billion in criminal assets moved offshore. Terrorist cells exploiting security gaps. International syndicates adapting operations. Witness networks completely compromised. Mitchell watched from his attorney's office as his name became synonymous with law enforcement bias. Year's Mitchell effect trending nationwide. Bias lets criminals escape. Prejudice aids termination. Badge bias kills. The Attorney General announced sweeping reforms. Nationwide credential verification system, mandatory federal ID recognition training, real-time body camera monitoring, bias, incident tracking database, professional diversity protocols, community oversight requirements, international cooperation standards. Chief Rodriguez implemented immediate changes. Every officer retrains or resigns. Zero tolerance for credential bias. Full transparency in all interactions. Community trust must be rebuilt. Professional respect non-negotiable. The FBI's latest assessment shocked Congress. Drug trafficking increased 67%, human trafficking expanded 45%, money laundering up 89%, terrorist activity rose 34%, criminal networks grew 56%, evidence chains broken. Witness protection compromised. International law enforcement demanded action. Interpol. U.S. bias creating global security gaps. Europol. Criminal exploitation of prejudice. RCMP. Cross-border operations at risk. The Senate passed emergency legislation, mandatory credential recognition training, real-time verification systems, National Oversight Committee, standardized protocols, cultural competency requirements, regular. Department audits, clear violation consequences. Social media amplified new developments. A justice debt. Reform or face federal charges. The FBI official. Prejudice aids criminals. A police reform. Complete overhaul needed. Civil rights. Pattern exposed. Nationwide Officer Reynolds led department retraining. Credentials have no color. Verification takes minutes. Prejudice costs billions. Bias aids criminals. Professional respect saves lives. The DOJ expanded their investigation, review all verification incidents, analyze body camera footage, audit complaint records, examine training procedures, assess department cultures, evaluate oversight systems, investigate leadership response. When prejudice compromises national security, immediate action becomes necessary. Today, I'm signing Executive Order 14789, mandating immediate reform of all federal, state, and local law enforcement credential verification procedures. The Commission's preliminary findings shocked the nation. 3,456 documented bias incidents, annually $23.7 billion in compromised operations, 678 criminal suspects escaped, 234 terrorist activities undetected, 890 trafficking cases compromised, 1,234. Investigations ruined 456 international cases. Affected Marcus briefed the Commission on escalating threats. Our escaped suspect now controls 3 major drug corridors. Human trafficking operations expanded into 12 new cities. Money laundering networks exploiting police prejudice. International criminals targeting biased departments. Terrorist cells using racial profiling as cover. Mitchell's termination. Hearing concluded, officers' bias directly aided criminal enterprises. Pattern of discriminatory behavior documented. Multiple federal operations compromised. Department liabilities significantly increased. Public trust irreparably damaged. Professional standards repeatedly violated. Position of authority systematically abused. The Justice Department implemented nationwide changes, automated credential verification systems, real-time body camera monitoring, bias incident tracking database, professional diversity protocols, community oversight requirements, international cooperation standards, federal agency coordination. Chief Rodriguez faced congressional questioning. How did this pattern of bias persist? Why were complaints ignored? What systemic failures allowed this? How many operations were compromised? When will reforms take effect? The FBI's latest threat assessment: criminal networks expanding rapidly, drug trafficking routes multiplying, human trafficking increasing, money laundering networks, growing terrorist activities, escalating evidence chains, compromised witness protection, threatened, international response intensified, UN Security Council, global security threatened, NATO, alliance operations compromised, EU, criminal exploitation of bias, ASEAN, cross-border concerns rising. The Senate expanded emergency legislation, mandatory federal oversight, real-time verification systems, national incident database, standardized training protocols, cultural competency requirements, regular department audits, clear violation consequences. Social media tracked new developments, bias aids, crime trending globally, credentials over color, police prejudice costs, reform now officer. Reynolds testified about cultural change. Every officer must recognize authority regardless of race. Verification protects public safety. Prejudice helps criminals escape. Bias threatens national security. The DOJ audit expanded nationwide. Review all law enforcement agencies. Analyze incident patterns. Document systemic failures. Examine training deficiencies. Assess leadership responsibility. Evaluate oversight effectiveness. Investigate complaint procedures. The National Security Council convened an emergency session. Satellite footage showed the escaped suspect meeting with known terrorist leaders in Mexico City. 3 months of unchecked criminal activity had created unprecedented security threats. Marcus presented the latest intelligence. Target has established operations in 17 countries. Drug trafficking revenue exceeds $5 billion monthly. Human trafficking expanded to 3 continents. Money laundering through 46 banks. Terrorist cells receiving direct funding. Witness elimination operations active. Law enforcement infiltration ongoing. The President addressed the Security Council. One officer's prejudice sparked an international crisis. Criminal networks exploiting police bias. National security compromised by discrimination. Immediate action required at all levels. New evidence of Mitchell's impact emerged. Criminal assets quadrupled since escaped drug routes expanded through 8 states. Human trafficking victims increased 300%. Money laundering networks doubled. Terrorist funding reached record levels. Evidence destruction accelerated. Witness intimidation escalated. The DOJ announced stricter measures. Federal oversight of all departments. Real-time credential. Monitoring automated verification systems. Bias detection algorithms. Professional diversity requirements. Community review boards. International cooperation protocols. Chief Rodriguez implemented crisis response. Every officer undergoes federal screening. Continuous credential verification required. Zero tolerance for professional bias. Immediate reporting of all incidents. Full transparency with oversight boards. FBI tracking revealed alarming patterns. criminal networks targeting biased officers, trafficking routes through prejudiced departments, money laundering via discriminatory jurisdictions, terrorist cells exploiting racial profiling, evidence disappearing in biased precincts, witnesses silenced in problem areas, operations compromised systematically, international agencies reported, Interpol, global security threat level raised. Europol, criminal exploitation of U.S. police bias. UN security, worldwide law enforcement impact. The Senate expanded emergency powers. Immediate federal intervention authority. Nationwide credential verification system, mandatory bias elimination programs, real-time incident monitoring, professional respect requirements, department culture overhaul, leadership, accountability, measures, social, media-tracked criminal expansion, bias aids, crime showing attack patterns, prejudice kills, revealing victim statistics, reform now mapping criminal growth, credentials over color tracking incidents, Officer Reynolds briefed fellow officers, criminals, target prejudice departments, bias creates security breaches, verification prevents exploitation, professional respect saves lives. The United Nations Security Council designated the escaped criminal network as a critical global threat. Surveillance footage from 5 continents showed the expanding operation that one officer's prejudice had unleashed. Marcus briefed international law enforcement. Criminal empire now spans 23 countries. Drug trafficking revenue hitting $7 billion monthly. Human trafficking operations in 40 cities. Money laundering through 62 banks. Terrorist cells receiving direct support. Police departments being infiltrated. Witness elimination squads active globally. Mitchell watched news coverage from his prison cell. Former officers' bias creates international crisis. Police prejudice, AIDS, criminal empire. Single act of discrimination threatens global security. Bias-born criminal network expands worldwide. The Justice Department revealed new findings. Criminal assets reached $45 billion drug routes through 12 countries. Human trafficking victims exceed 10,000 money laundering operations. Tripled terrorist funding, topped records, evidence destruction. Systematic witness intimidation. Global President Harris addressed the nation. What began as one officer's prejudice has evolved into an unprecedented security crisis. Today, I'm declaring a national emergency to combat both the criminal threat and the law enforcement bias that enabled it. Executive Order 13790 mandated federal takeover of bias departments, real-time credential verification, automated bias, detection systems, professional diversity requirements, community oversight boards, international cooperation protocols, leadership accountability measures. FBI surveillance showed strategic targeting, criminals exploiting prejudiced precincts, trafficking, routes through biased areas, money laundering via discriminatory zones, terrorist cells using profiling gaps, evidence vanishing in problem departments, witnesses targeted in biased jurisdictions, operations compromised, systematically international. Response intensified. NATO, global security framework threatened. EU, criminal exploitation of bias critical. ASEAN, cross-border operations compromised. African Union, continental security at risk. The Senate passed the Emergency Security Act, immediate department federal oversight, nationwide credential verification system, mandatory bias elimination programs, real-time incident monitoring, professional respect requirements, department culture overhaul, leadership criminal liability chief. Rodriguez implemented crisis measures, every interaction recorded and reviewed. Continuous credential verification mandatory. Zero tolerance for professional discrimination. Immediate reporting of all incidents. Full transparency with oversight boards. Regular federal compliance checks. Community review of all procedures. Interpol headquarters in Lyon, France, hosted an emergency summit. Law enforcement chiefs from 47 countries gathered to address the criminal empire born from one officer's prejudice. The global threat assessment displayed shocking statistics. Criminal network active in 35 countries. Monthly revenue exceeding 12 billion human trafficking victims, surpassing 15,000 drug routes through 18 international borders. Money laundering via 89 financial institutions, terrorist operations in 23 regions, police departments infiltrated in 12 nations. Marcus presented surveillance evidence. Their operation exploits law enforcement bias worldwide. They target prejudiced departments deliberately. Officers' discrimination creates security gaps. Professional profiling enables criminal expansion. Bias incidents map to criminal growth. The United Nations expanded sanctions, asset freezes on bias-compromised departments, travel bans for discriminatory officers, international credential verification required, real-time bias, monitoring mandated professional respect protocols enforced. Department accountability measures leadership criminal liability, established. Mitchell's prison interview aired globally. I never thought my assumptions would cause this. One moment of prejudice helped create an empire. My bias gave criminals their biggest opportunity. Professional discrimination threatens everyone. FBI tracking revealed strategic patterns, criminal networks studying police bias, trafficking routes following prejudiced zones, money laundering through discriminatory areas, terrorist cells exploiting profiling habits, evidence destruction in biased precincts, witness targeting in problem departments, operations expanding through prejudiced regions, international agencies, coordinated response. Europol, bias-based criminal, expansion critical, RCMP, professional discrimination aids crime, Scotland Yard, credential prejudice enables threats. Australian Federal Police, bias creating crisis. President Harris authorized extraordinary measures, federal takeover of compromised departments, international oversight of credential verification, real-time bias detection systems, professional. Diversity requirements, community review boards, global cooperation protocols. Leadership prosecution powers, Chief Rodriguez briefed reform progress. Every interaction monitored internationally. Continuous credential verification standard. Zero tolerance for professional discrimination. Immediate reporting to global database. Full transparency with oversight boards. Regular international compliance checks. Community review of all procedures. The criminal empire's expansion continued. Operations in 42 countries. Revenue reaching $15 billion monthly. Trafficking victims exceeding 20,000 drug routes through 25 nations, money laundering via 100 banks, terrorist cells in 30 regions, police infiltration in 15 countries. The Joint Terrorism Task Force headquarters activated its highest alert level. Satellite imagery showed the criminal empire establishing training camps in remote locations across 3 continents. Marcus presented the latest intelligence briefing. Their network now incorporates military expertise. Training camps in 15 countries identified. Advanced weapons procurement confirmed. Law enforcement infiltration expanding. Professional credential forgery operations active. International security forces compromised. Global threat level unprecedented. The numbers displayed on command center screens. Criminal assets exceeded $60 billion, operations active in 48 countries, human trafficking victims near 25,000 drug routes through 30 nations, money laundering via 150 banks, terrorist cells in 40. Region's police corruption in 20 countries. Mitchell's prison psychiatrist testified his bias reflected systemic problems. Like prejudice created security vulnerabilities. Discrimination enabled criminal expansion. Professional profiling aided terrorists. Assumption-based policing threatens safety. International response intensified. NATO. Criminal exploitation. Critical. UN. Global security framework compromised. EU. Professional bias aids terrorism. ASEAN. Regional stability threatened. President Harris authorized extreme measures. Military oversight of compromised departments. International credential. Verification required real-time bias detection. Mandatory professional respect protocols, enforced community review boards, empowered global cooperation, expanded leadership prosecution, enhanced FBI surveillance, revealed strategic evolution. Criminals. Targeting prejudice zones, trafficking following bias patterns, laundering through discriminatory areas, terrorists exploiting profiling habits, evidence vanishing in problem precincts, witnesses eliminated in biased regions, operations expanding. Through prejudice, the Senate expanded emergency powers, federal control of all law enforcement, nationwide credential verification, mandatory bias elimination, real-time monitoring, professional standards, department overhaul, leadership accountability. Chief Rodriguez implemented crisis protocols, every interaction internationally monitored. Continuous credential verification required. Zero tolerance for discrimination. Immediate incident reporting mandatory. Full transparency with oversight. Regular compliance checks. Community review standard. The United Nations Command Center tracked the criminal empire's military buildup. Three-dimensional holographic maps showed training facilities, weapons caches, and infiltration points across the globe. Marcus briefed the Security Council. Their forces now exceed some national armies. Military-grade weapons in 30 countries. Training camps producing elite operatives. Law enforcement thoroughly compromised. Professional credentials widely forged. International security barriers breached. Global response capability crippled. Latest intelligence revealed criminal assets reached $75 billion operations in 52 countries, active trafficking victims exceeding 30,000 drug routes through 35 nations, money laundering via 200 banks, terrorist cells in 45 regions, police corruption. In 25 countries, Mitchell watched from maximum security. International criminal empire, 6 months after bias incident. How police prejudice created global crisis. One officer's discrimination threatens world security. Criminal network exploits law enforcement bias. The president addressed global leaders. What began as one officer's prejudice has evolved into a military-scale threat. Today, we're activating international emergency protocols to combat both the criminal empire and the systemic bias that enabled it. Executive Order 13795 authorized military control of law enforcement, international credential oversight, real-time bias monitoring, professional respect requirements, community control boards, global cooperation mandate, leadership prosecution powers, FBI. Tracking showed strategic advancement, military-style training camps, active weapons stockpiles, growing infiltration units deployed. Command structures established communications networks, secured intelligence operations, active global reach, expanding international. Response escalated. NATO, criminal force threatens stability. UN, global security framework failing. EU, professional bias aids militarization. ASEAN, regional defense compromised. The Senate passed the Crisis Response Act. Federal control of all policing global. Credential verification, mandatory bias elimination, real-time monitoring, professional standards, department restructuring, leadership accountability. The Pentagon's War Room monitored global developments. Military satellites tracked the criminal empire's rapid expansion into a quasi-military force threatening international stability. Marcus delivered his assessment to Joint Chiefs. Their military capability rivals small nations. Training camps in 40 countries identified. Advanced weapons systems confirmed. Law enforcement extensively compromised. Professional infiltration units deployed. International security barriers breached. Global response capabilities crippled. Latest threat analysis showed criminal assets exceeded $90 billion, operations active in 60 countries, military training, camps in 45 nations, weapons stockpiles in 50 regions, intelligence networks in 40 states, police corruption in 30 countries, security forces compromised globally. Mitchell's prison interview aired. My prejudice gave them their start. One moment of bias created this. Professional discrimination armed them. Now they're stronger than some armies. President Harris activated military response. What began as law enforcement bias has evolved into a military crisis. Today, I'm authorizing armed forces to combat this threat. Defense Department mobilized. Military oversight of police worldwide, international credential verification, real-time bias monitoring systems, professional respect protocols, community review. Requirements, global cooperation mandates, leadership accountability measures, FBI intelligence revealed, military-grade training, active advanced weapons acquired, elite units deployed globally, command structures, established communications networks, secured intelligence operations expanding worldwide reach, growing international military response. NATO, criminal force threatens peace. UN, global security compromised. EU, professional bias aids militarization. ASEAN, regional defense threatened. The Senate authorized military action. Armed forces control of policing global credential. Verification, mandatory bias elimination, real-time monitoring, professional standards, department restructuring, leadership prosecution. NATO headquarters declared maximum alert as the criminal empire's military capabilities reached critical levels. Satellite imagery showed advanced weapons testing in remote locations worldwide. Marcus briefed international commanders. Their force strength matches medium-sized nations. Training facilities in 50 countries active. Nuclear material acquisition attempted. Law enforcement completely compromised. Professional military units deployed. International security critically threatened. Global response severely handicapped. Latest intelligence revealed criminal assets exceeded $100 billion, operations in 65 countries, active military camps in 50 nations. Nuclear facilities targeted intelligence networks in 45 states, police forces compromised in 35 countries, security systems breached worldwide. The President addressed the UN Security Council. A single act of police prejudice has evolved into the greatest security threat of our century. Today, we face a military-grade criminal empire born from law enforcement. Bias. International military mobilized. Armed forces deployed globally, credential verification mandatory, real-time bias, monitoring active professional protocols, enforced community oversight, expanded global cooperation, enhanced leadership accountability, strengthened Pentagon tracking showed, military training intensified, advanced weapons tested elite units globally, positioned command structures, solidified communications networks expanded, intelligence operations, active nuclear capabilities, pursued FBI, assessment revealed. Criminal empire militarizing rapidly, professional forces deployed, strategic targets identified, police infiltration complete. International response, compromised security forces, undermined global threat level. Critical Mitchell watched from solitary. Confinement, bias-born empire threatens world peace. Police prejudice created military crisis. Criminal force tests, nuclear capabilities. Global security threatened by discrimination. The United Nations declared a global state of emergency. Military satellites tracked the criminal empire's expansion into nuclear capability development. Marcus addressed the Security Council. Their military power now rivals major nations. Training. Facilities in 60 countries active. Nuclear weapons development confirmed. Law enforcement globally compromised. Elite military units deployed worldwide. International security critically breached. Global response capabilities neutralized. Latest threat assessment showed criminal assets exceeded $150 billion. Operations in 70 countries, active military camps in 55 nations, nuclear sites in 10 regions, intelligence networks in 50 states, police forces compromised in 40 countries, security. Systems breached in 60 nations. The president authorized maximum response. What began as one officer's prejudice now threatens nuclear proliferation. Today, we face an unprecedented military crisis born from law enforcement bias. Global military mobilization initiated. Armed forces deployed worldwide. Credential verification enhanced. Bias monitoring, intensified professional protocols, strengthened community oversight, expanded international cooperation, maximized leadership. Accountability enforced. Pentagon tracking revealed. Nuclear facilities identified, advanced weapons tested, elite units positioned globally, command structures, enhanced communications networks, secured intelligence operations, expanded strategic targets. Selected FBI intelligence showed criminal empire approaching nuclear capability, professional military forces active strategic locations, targeted police infiltration, complete international response, compromised security forces, undermined global crisis, imminent. Mitchell watched. News coverage. Criminal empire pursues nuclear weapons. Police bias created global crisis. World peace threatened by discrimination. Prejudice-born force tests, nuclear capabilities. The International Atomic Energy Agency raised global alert levels. Surveillance confirmed the criminal empire's acquisition of nuclear materials in 3 countries. Marcus briefed world leaders. Nuclear weapon development in final stages. Training. Facilities in 70 countries. Military capability exceeds most nations. Law enforcement completely infiltrated. Elite forces deployed strategically. International security critically compromised. Global response severely limited. Latest intelligence revealed criminal assets reached $200 billion. Operations in 75 countries, active military bases in 60 nations, nuclear development in 15 regions, intelligence networks in 55 states, police forces compromised in 45 countries, security. Systems breached in 65 nations. The president addressed emergency session. A single officer's prejudice has escalated into potential nuclear catastrophe. Today, we activate maximum military response to counter this unprecedented threat. Global military response intensified. Armed forces deployed globally. Special forces activated nuclear prevention protocols, professional security, enhanced international cooperation, maximized leadership accountability, enforced emergency powers. Activated Pentagon tracking showed nuclear materials secured, weapons systems tested, elite units, positioned command structures, enhanced communications networks, secured intelligence operations, expanded strategic targets, identified FBI. Assessment revealed Criminal empire achieved nuclear capability, professional military force, active strategic locations, targeted, police infiltration, complete international response. Compromised security forces undermined, global crisis imminent. Mitchell's prison interview aired. My prejudice started nuclear crisis. One moment of bias armed terrorists. Professional discrimination threatens world. Law enforcement bias created catastrophe. United Nations enacted emergency protocols. Military control of nuclear sites, international security, enhanced real-time threat monitoring, professional forces deployed, community protection, activated global cooperation, mandated, leadership accountability, maximized. The United Nations Security Council activated its Doomsday Protocol. Global military satellites tracked nuclear material movement across 3 continents as the criminal empire positioned its newly acquired weapons. Marcus delivered critical intelligence. Nuclear weapons assembled and mobile. Military bases in 80 countries. Combat capability exceeds NATO forces. Law enforcement globally compromised. Elite units strategically positioned. International security critically breached. Global response severely limited. Latest threat assessment revealed criminal assets exceeded $250 billion. Operations in 80 countries, active military bases in 65 nations, nuclear weapons in 20 regions, intelligence networks in 60 states, police forces compromised in 50 countries. Security systems breached in 70 nations. President Harris addressed emergency summit. What began with one officer's prejudice now threatens nuclear apocalypse. Today, we face humanity's greatest crisis, born from a single moment of law enforcement bias. Global military mobilization expanded. Armed forces deployed worldwide, nuclear response teams activated, special forces mobilized, professional security. Enhanced international cooperation, maximized leadership accountability, enforced emergency powers, expanded Pentagon. Tracking showed nuclear weapons mobile. Military forces deployed elite units, positioned command structures, enhanced communications networks, secured intelligence operations, expanded strategic targets, selected FBI assessment confirmed. Criminal empire nuclear capable professional military active strategic locations, targeted police infiltration, complete international response, compromised security forces, undermined global crisis, imminent. Mitchell watched from maximum security. Bias born. Empire controls nuclear weapons. Police prejudice created nuclear crisis. World peace threatened by discrimination. Global security compromised by bias. International response escalated. NATO. Nuclear threat level critical. UN. Global security severely compromised. EU. Professional bias-enabled catastrophe. ASEAN. Regional stability threatened. The UN Doomsday Command Center tracked nuclear threats worldwide. Intelligence confirmed the criminal empire had achieved full nuclear strike capability, transforming one officer's prejudice into potential global catastrophe. Marcus briefed international command, nuclear weapons positioned globally. Military bases in 90 countries. Combat power exceeds combined forces. Law enforcement totally compromised. Elite strike teams deployed. International security breached. Global response crippled. Latest intelligence showed criminal assets reached $300 billion. Operations in 85 countries, active military bases in 70 nations, nuclear weapons in 25 regions, intelligence networks in 65 states, police forces compromised in 55 countries. Security systems breached in 75 nations. The president activated final protocols. A moment of police prejudice has escalated to nuclear crisis. Today, we face extinction-level threats born from law enforcement bias. Global military response maximized. Armed forces fully deployed, nuclear countermeasures active, special forces mobilized, professional security, enhanced international cooperation. Maximized leadership accountability, enforced emergency powers, expanded Pentagon. Tracking revealed, nuclear strikes prepared, military forces positioned, elite units deployed. Command structures activated, communications networks secured, intelligence. Operations expanded. Strategic targets marked, FBI assessment confirmed. Criminal empire nuclear ready. Professional military active. Strategic locations targeted. Police infiltration. Complete international response. Compromised security forces undermined, global crisis. Imminent Mitchell's final interview aired. My prejudice risked humanity. One bias armed terrorists. Professional discrimination doomed us. Law enforcement failure threatened all. International crisis response activated. NATO, nuclear holocaust imminent. UN, global security collapsed. EU, professional bias enabled disaster. ASEAN, regional stability destroyed. The Global Defense Command activated its final contingency plans. Satellite imagery confirmed nuclear weapons positioned in strategic locations worldwide, the ultimate consequence of one officer's prejudice. Marcus delivered the final assessment. Nuclear strikes imminent, military presence in 100 countries, combat power unprecedented, law enforcement destroyed, elite forces ready, international security collapsed, global response neutralized. Final intelligence confirmed. Criminal assets exceeded $350 billion, operations in 90 countries, active military bases in 75 nations, nuclear weapons in 30 regions, intelligence networks in 70 states, police forces compromised in 60 countries, security. Systems breached in 80 nations. The president addressed humanity. From one moment of police prejudice, we face extinction. Today's nuclear crisis grew from a single act of law enforcement bias. Global military response maximized. Armed forces fully engaged, nuclear defenses activated, special forces deployed, professional security, enhanced international cooperation, maximized leadership accountability, enforced emergency powers, expanded Pentagon, confirmed nuclear strikes prepared, military forces positioned, elite units deployed, command structures activated, communications secured, intelligence operational, strategic targets marked. Final FBI assessment showed criminal empire nuclear capable. Professional military active, strategic locations targeted, police infiltration complete. International response compromised, security forces undermined, global crisis. Peaked Mitchell's last words recorded, my prejudice threatened Earth. One bias armed terrorists. Professional discrimination doomed us. Law enforcement failure risked all. International final response. NATO, nuclear war imminent. UN, global security destroyed. EU, professional bias enabled catastrophe. ASEAN, world peace ended.